Hello, welcome back to Al Talks podcast. In this week's episode, I will be discussing one of my new favorite podcasts. I've talked about George Lopez's podcast before. Oh my God, hi! But recently I've caught up with. I think I'm only missing a handful of episodes. Pretty much caught up to date. And from listening to his episodes, like one thing I've found about his podcast is that like George Lopez is extremely funny on it. Like obviously he's funny as one of the funniest comedians out there, but on this podcast he's I suppose what I'm trying to say is like he is very loose. He tells great stories. It's George is always he's had an interesting upbringing. He was raised by his grandparents, and he never knew his father. His mom abandoned him when he was 5, so he has a lot of interesting stories about growing up and things he liked in terms of music, sports, and all that. And one of the first kind of big guests he had on was Gil Carrilo. Now, Gil Carrilo is the man responsible for catching Richard Ramirez, who in the later years became known as the Night Stalker. He was a serial killer that lived in California, and he terrorized neighborhoods. He was kind of the boogeyman for a number of years, and Gil Carrilo brought him to justice, working for the LAPD Sheriff's Department. The Night Stalker documentary is on Netflix. That's how Gil became very famous. And after a while, kept listening to the podcast, and Gil became a kind of recurring guest. Because at the start, when George Lopez started the podcast, he had his friend Breen on. Now, not the same Breen the comedian, but he was a long-time friend. I think they were friends for over 20 years, and all of a sudden he disappeared from the podcast, and he got a new producer called, his name is Grant. He's a young kid. I think Grant's like 28 or 29. And for a long time I wondered what happened. And then George brought it up in one of the episodes that he said basically that him and Breen called him one day and said that he wasn't going to do it anymore, that he had, and that he had fallen out with George and stuff like that. So it was kind of sad, but the podcast works really well now. He has Grant there now, he has Gil Carrilo on every time, and Gil, his experience and his level of expertise, and him being a Chicano as well. Him and George play off each other very well. Like it's the podcast is really good. I'm glad George does the podcast, because we get a lot of interesting insights into his life, and he has different guests on and stuff like that. And Gil has had an interesting life himself since retirement. He's no longer with the Sheriff's Department. He does a lot of outreach. He speaks at different seminars and stuff like that. And him and George have this really good rapport, and it really shows in the podcast, and it makes it really interesting. And it's quite enjoyable watching the episodes. It's definitely become one of my favorites podcasts, and could run out things to say about that podcast, but that's the general gist of it. I'm really enjoying it. I'm glad the direction of change it's taken, that it's sometimes things have to change for the better, and in that case they most certainly did. But in other news, I showed it to you last time, but once again, this is my little merch. I have merch. Now I have received the bigger package of these. Oh. A bigger package of those stickers. I now have over 110 of them. I'm gonna try and set up a sort of an online store thing at some stage in the next couple of weeks. Try and figure out how to sell those to you guys. Although if you want to support me and support the podcast, because obviously I don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and upgrading the equipment and stuff is going to cost a fair bit of money. So if you want to help a broke comic out, well, not broke, but you know, a little bit of financial support wouldn't go astray. So I can quit my day job. That would be ideal. That would be the dream. And I can get a big podcast studio and have loads of assistants. I would like to have a producer. I've been thinking a lot about that, kind of expand the podcast team a bit. Like before when I did the episode with Josh, that was really big help. He always gives me really good advice for the stuff that he's learned from YouTube and stuff like that. I try, and this year I'll try and up the game as a child. Oh, also another thing, I want to do another Instagram live because I haven't done one of those in a while, and I really enjoyed doing them. It's just kind of find the time and schedule and stuff. So I'll do one next week at some stage. I will let you know on my social media what day exactly, once I know what days I'm not working next week, and I will let you know. And I suppose I'll talk more about the merchandise side of things in that live video on Instagram, and we shall see then. Any other news? I don't think there's any other news other than the merch stuff. Like I said, I've gotten a big package of stuff from Sticker Mule. I like the stickers. I think they're cool. In the future I would like to get more stuff made, like t-shirts, hats, probably masks. Be very useful for the current pandemic happening, unfortunately still going on. Computers run really high. I don't know what's the computer is not particularly happy, but what can you do? Computer's never happy. At the moment I have no idea when I'll be coming back into open mics or back into shows. None of the clubs have replied back about doing shows yet, but a lot of them are not open yet, because like I said, currently in Ireland we have a curfew, well, not a curfew, that pubs have to and bars have to close at 8. But this week now the government's supposed to be meeting actually today when this comes out to talk about easing the restrictions. So hopefully in February they'll kind of calm down and maybe I'll get in and do an open mic. Because as of now, I've not done any comedy whatsoever since the 2nd of December last year, and it's been over a month, and I would like to get back to doing it soon, because you know, if what's the phrase, you know, we gotta grease the wheels or something along those lines anyway. But yeah, so I'll let you know about the live next week. I'm really looking forward to that actually, and I think that's pretty much it. Thank you for all the support so far this year. Still going strong, and thank you for watching, and I will see you all next week.